Have you ever wondered how much consultants around the world in the top consulting firms get paid? Well, I Do Things Yes posted on Reddit the Salary Megathread for 2023-24 to try and bring a bit of transparency into the industry. He writes, annual review now that 2024 salaries should have been issued. This year is probably more interesting than any of the previous years. Let's create transparency in the industry and discuss salaries. This information is important to understand how firms have reacted to inflation and the downturn in the industry. And the best thing about this is he then gives a standardized list of things to give. Everyone responded to that with their comments on Reddit in that standardized way. And that is a wonderful thing because then I can extract all of that data and chop into different ways that is meaningful. So make that data really, really meaningful. So I took all of that, put it into Excel, and then I pressed that wonderful magic button, the pivot table, and I won't bore you with all of the pivot tabling that I did, but ultimately we came up with a few different ways we can slice this data to really, really tell a story. So all in all, we got 425 comments, 121 usable responses, because some people responded to other people's comments and stuff like that. And all of the wages that we got, I baselined it to US dollars. In other words, if someone responded in Australian dollars or in Singapore dollars, for example, I baselined that back to US dollars. So what we're looking at now is we had overall the average consulting wage, just to give you a high level idea, was $132,000 every year. So that's the overall average across all of that data. The overall average tenure was 4.4 years. And what we're going to look at is the average wages per firm, average bonus per firm, wage increases in 2024. So who's getting the biggest increases? Wages by location. So who gets paid the most around the world? And wages by role. So what level or what role actually gets paid the most? Wages by tenure. So is it worth staying at a particular firm? Is it worth waiting it out for that particular pay rise? And lastly, wages by education level. In other words, is it worth getting that MBA or a master's or a bachelor's degree instead of just an undergraduate degree? We have all of that data now, and that's just so great. So let's jump into this wonderful stuff. First of all, let's get a baseline across all of the firms. These are the roles that came out of the data, so we can get an idea for where each role fits from low to high. And it starts with the analyst role at $67,152 per year, moving to consultant at an average of $107,000. Senior consultant was $121,000, so bit of a nice difference there as you move into a senior. As an associate, the average across all of the data was $124,000. There was this one's a bit of an outlier. The principal engineer, there was only one of these, so take this with a grain of salt. But that was for a tech consulting firm as a boutique, $180,000, which is probably to be expected for a principal engineer. Senior managers and managers though, so there weren't as many senior managers, and on average they got paid less than just the managers, probably because of the firm. So we'll have a look at this in a second. But the boutique firms tend to pay less overall, and the big four firms tend to pay less overall. So if you're a senior manager there, you're getting paid less than a manager in one of the larger firms like McKinsey, Bain, or BCG. $189,000 just for a manager on average across all of the consulting data. $210,000 for a vice president, or $278,000 on average for a director. And the one you've all been waiting for, the one that many consultants work days and nights and weekends and every single day of the year to become as partner, the average here was $850,000. Now, take this with a grain of salt because there were only two partners who responded. So I do have that in the back of my mind. One was just straight up $1 million a year, US, and the other one was a $350,000 base with a $400,000 bonus. So a lot of their money came from the bonus side of it. But ultimately, you'd probably be pretty happy with that. So anywhere around that in US dollars. Now let's look at the consultant wages by firm type. And this is what I was telling you about before, because if you're a senior manager in a big four firm, then chances are you'll probably still be paid less than just a manager in one of the larger ones. So average for McKinsey, BCG or Bain, US dollars $204,000 on average. And there were 16 respondents for MBB, 59 respondents for the boutique firms, and that's $143,000 on average. Tier 2, so Accenture, Strategian, Kearney, Oliver Wyman, a few different ones there. The Tier 2 firms, $139,000. And the Big Four, right at the end, $103,000 a year on average. And there were 33 respondents for that one. So that was their overall money that they got every year. But what about the bonuses? So for a boutique, they paid the highest bonuses, even though they weren't paid the highest overall. Tier 2, 21% bonuses overall. Big Four, 12% bonuses. And McKinsey, Bain, and BCG, 10% bonuses. So even though MBB was paid the most overall, they had the lowest bonus, which is very, very interesting. So that's something to, I guess, take that on board as you're looking across where to work or who to engage with. Expected increases. So people also gave their expected 2024 salaries and all-in salaries. So McKinsey, Bain, and BCG, 8.1% increase expected across the board to $221,000 on average. Boutique firms, 6.4%, and Tier 2 firms, 6.4% increase expected from $153,000 to $148,000. And lastly, Big Four firms, again, trailing behind everyone here at a 5.3% expected increase and $108,000 overall on average. Now, what about where you live? Does that make a difference to how much you're paid? And the answer is absolutely yes. This is really, really interesting data. So we've got from $4,000 a year, someone was paid. Remember, this is in US dollars. So that's obviously in a country that doesn't have a strong relationship with the US dollar, all the way up to $209,000 on average, depending on your location. Let's look at them really, really quickly. So who was the lowest there? And it was in Vietnam, $4,000 a year. The Philippines, $13,000 a year. Pakistan, $13,000 a year also. These are quite low cost of living, so you might be able to get away with that, but still pretty harsh. Hungary, $21,000. Brazil, $24,000 a year. And Chile, $33,000. India, this was another interesting one. Quite a few responses from India, $37,000 US dollars every single year. And of course, as you know, the education level is high and the quality of consultants can be quite good in India also, which is a wonderful thing. New Zealand, $40,000. There was only one respondent there, and that's in New Zealand dollars, which doesn't have a strong relationship against the US dollar. So take that one with a grain of salt. Mexico, there were a couple there, $56,000 on average. France, now all across Europe, it was very, very similar, but France tended to get the lowest out of the European countries at $70,000. And also in their comments, they were sort of a little bit discouraged. So French consultants are a little bit sadder than everyone else. Unfortunately, I'm sorry, people in France, that is the situation. Finland, $70,000, but no sad comments, so I guess that's a good thing. Saudi Arabia, $73,000 also, and a pretty low cost of living in Saudi Arabia, from what I could tell from the comments there. Denmark, $89,000. Australia, $92,000 in US dollars, of course. Austria, $98,000. And then we move into these ones, which are all very similar. Again, $109,000. For Canada, $109,000. UK, $109,000. So quite a few respondents from the UK. Germany, $109,000. Italy, $110,000. So all of these in that European region. Netherlands, $113,000. And then we take a big jump into the last few, where we've got Dubai at $170,000, and zero tax if you actually are a citizen of Dubai and you live and work there full time. If you still live in the US, then the US will obviously find you and tax you no matter what. So, but that's something to consider. The USA at $191,000 on average in that location, and Switzerland $200,000, and Singapore, very high cost of living in these countries, Switzerland and Singapore, $209,000. All right. Now, what about consultant wages by education level? Now, I also thought this was really, really interesting. Particularly, two things stood out to me here. Well, first of all, we've got a few people with just a high school certificate or a high school diploma, you might call it. The average for high school people was $102,000 US dollars a year in consultant life. For a bachelor's degree and an undergraduate degree. So a bachelor's degree is the 4-year degree, so the full proper degree. Undergraduate is anything less than a 4-year degree. It could also be an associate degree, which might be an advanced diploma in other countries. So it turns out that just getting an undergraduate degree could actually be worthwhile. The average wage was $120,000 as opposed to $115,000 for a full bachelor's degree. Something to consider there. There were a lot more people with just undergraduate degrees there. So 54 versus 17 with bachelors. But the real interesting one was the masters. So people with masters in general, 127,000. But if you get a master's, which is an MBA, so a Master's of Business Administration, then it turns out it's actually worthwhile. So that's always good to see. You know, you get the stats from universities saying, hey, do your MBA, it's worth it, you'll get paid more, this, that, and the other. But this is the actual data. So 17 people with an MBA versus 29 with a general master's in their particular field. Could be science, could be finance, or whatever they were working in usually, technology sometimes. But yeah, so it turns out it's doubled. It's actually nearly double, which is insane. Now, I wouldn't have expected that myself, but now we have the data, and that's why we get the data, right? So that's why we look at it, which is a wonderful thing. Then also, how long we stay. This is pretty interesting. Down the bottom is the years. So from 1 to the highest person was 24 years of experience and tenure at the place that they were working at. So I put this trend, it's a 3-year trend. So a 3-year rolling average, basically. And so with that, a moving average. So with that, it gives us a nice trend line. And also with that, we can see up to about years 9 or 10, that average does sort of trend upwards. And here, this is something that we should be aware of. These big outliers here, this is where our partners sat. So this one had our $700,000 a year partner, and this one had our $1 million a year partner. Something to be aware of. Now, having said that, they were still higher. So they were still high overall these years, just so that you're aware. So 10 years probably is where it started to level out, and ultimately it drops off. So it just sort of levels out or drops off to around that $239,000 a year level after 10 years. And that's all the data. So I hope you guys have enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next video.